Good afternoon. Welcome to the General Services Public Works Committee meeting for July 10th, 2023. I am Christy Wood, subbing in for our chairwoman, Councilmember Amy Evans. Joining me today is Councilmember Woody McEvers and Councilmember Dan English. First item on our agenda is request the approval for a change order number 1 with K&N Electric Motors Incorporated for the trickling filter pump rehabilitation project in the amount of $105,000, $128,000. Capital Programs Manager Mike Becker with the Wastewater Department. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, good afternoon. I would say about 6 months ago, we brought before council our request to rebuild some of our trickling filter pumps. In the process of rebuilding them, rather than purchasing new pumps, there's some investigative work that has to be done at the manufacturer's approved installers workshop. And during the process, they discovered that we have some issues. So little history, trickling filter pumps basically pump from our primary treatment into our secondary treatment, which is our trickling filters. Those are those two big white tanks that you see from the road at the treatment plant. So what did we discover? Well, the slide that's presented before you on the left, this is what a bearing looks like brand new. This paper thin one here, that's what we discovered in our pump when we dismantled it. That bearing is basically gone. And in the process, what it has done, it has worn down the actual pump shaft right here. This should all be the same diameter. So what caused this? Well, in my 33 years of experience with pumps, I've never seen
one of those pumps. What do you expect to get out of those?
As you recall, we actually got 30 years out of this, out of all three of these pumps, but we're not going to turn off the pump number 2 to find out whether or not it's going to have the same problem. But if we don't have to replace those parts as part of this change order, we can shelf that at the treatment plant, so when we go to rebuild it in the future, we will have the parts readily available. To answer your question, I'm sorry, Woody, I kind of sidestepped that. We get 10 years out of our pumps usually.
And you got 30 out of this.
We got 30 out of these.
You guys are cheaper than I thought, you know? Make it
pumps.
last, right?
Yeah.
Do they still make them that way? The other question was, is it the wear is longevity, or was it the chemicals in the water or the flow? That's just normal stuff?
It's normal.
So we know the line is broken underneath the freeway at some point. We don't know exactly where. Unfortunately, we can't dig up the freeway to repair the exact location. So we're going to have to remove that line through the casing underneath the freeway and replace the whole thing. So at the time, we were looking at different options on how to do that, because it's not easy sticking 20-foot chunks of pipe through the freeway and getting them to seal. So this is the length of the pipe that's underneath the freeway. From this side is where the water's coming out, to this side on the end of Mullen Avenue. So what we've talked about is we've come up with a solution. We're going to use HDPE pipe, which is a high-density polyethylene pipe that is actually fused together. And what you do is you pre-fuse it together. We could test it above ground, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pull the old line out and pull this new line through. It's very similar to the gas piping. It's used in water industries across the U.S. It's not used so much in Coeur d'Alene because it's hard to replace pipes with HDPE in existing neighborhoods, because you have to break it and cut it and break it and cut it. So it's easier to use the 20-foot sticks of the blue pipe that we use of C900. So we're opted to use the HDPE pipe. This is a fusible area which they use. They heat up both ends and they press it together, and it creates a little rib around it and seals up. This is another picture of how they do long sections of pipe and new developments in new areas. So that was the direction we decided to go. We went out and got bids, or tried to get bids from multiple contractors. There's not a whole lot of them that utilize HDPE pipe. Some people couldn't get it in by the end of the year. So the bids that came back, the lowest bidder was Big Sky for $89,307. We would like to move forward with that contract and move that to consent on council approval, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you. Woody?
So Fernand, are they helping pay for it?
No. Well, yes, they are. They pay for it through their services when they utilize water, so we bill them for the water.
Okay, and
We have to maintain those water lines throughout the city of Coeur d'Alene, so technically, they are paying for it, yes.
And they're back up on regular pay like everybody else now?
I believe so,
They
yeah.
had their own rate for a long time,
I
didn't
think they have their own rate for sewer. For water, it's been the same rate for as long as I can remember.
Is that the only water access for Fernand?
There's two accesses. We always try to keep a looped main through any area for fire flows or for any down such as this, because it's not easy to fix a single line sometimes. So we have one that goes through Sherman
Okay.
out there, and that's the only feed currently. This is the second feed, and it's currently off right now because it's not working.
So by having the two, you didn't have to shut them down?
Correct.
Okay. So they're not going without. Is this something you guys would use in other places, or is it just for this type of thing where you have to go through an existing casing?
We've used it in little sections in different areas. We had a boring project that went under Northwest Boulevard for a hydrant, so they didn't have to close it down, so we utilized that. One of the problems, and it's not a problem, it's new technology.
Right.
So it's just different is what it is, and we're learning how to better utilize it, is you can't use our current pressure testing methods with this type of pipe because it actually expands. So our current pipe, we pump our water up to 160 PSI, and it's got to hold for 2 hours and can only lose a certain percentage over a certain amount of time, but depending on the length. So there's a calculation process that we utilize. With this, we'll pump it up and it expands, so it doesn't hold that pressure. So it's a different testing method. We've used it before in certain situations. It's worked really well. That's why we wanted to use a contractor that's familiar with this type of pipe, so we can kind of watch and learn at the same time.
So it's not necessarily the future is this?
No, I mean, there's different types that they utilize out there, yes. We could go to that someday, but it's hard to utilize in our current situation. New neighborhoods, when you're putting it in, yeah, you could utilize it. Existing neighborhoods, it's not really cost effective because you have to cut and fuse a whole bunch of sections. And when you cut and fuse those pipes, if you look at that, it's really, really clean. My experience when I was doing it with gas lines in the past is whoever was doing that, if it failed, they were let go from the company. And you have to sign your name on it for the gas companies. Wow. So water's not as strict as that, but gives
Thank
you a
you.
little idea of how they operate those systems.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Great.
Well, just one more lesson about not taking on services for places outside the city, but that's a long time in the past. So, is this somebody you've used before, whoever this contractor?
Big Sky, yes.
Yeah,
Yes, Big
yeah.
Sky has done work for us. They've done work for wastewater. They're a very reputable company. They do a
Yeah.
good job. I was
Yeah.
happy to see that they bid and won.
Okay, then I would be happy to make a motion to recommend council accept the bid and award a contract to Big Sky Corporation for installation of the I-90 loop replacement to Fernand Village in the amount of $89,307.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
And our next item,
Oh,
request
boy.
approval of amendments to the City Records Retention Manual and Destruction Schedule. City Clerk Renata McLeod, Municipal Services Department.
Not wearing my eyeballs today, so bear with me. I'm not wearing my glasses. So I'm here to bring you some housekeeping items, and I know it was a gigantic portion of your packet. It's a lot to digest, but I promise you it's all good stuff. So this is a project that's taken a couple years because it just ends up always kind of getting down on the priority list. But it is an important document, and as you'll see, the Idaho Code requires us to have a records retention manual. So the Idaho Code also designates your city clerk as the records retention manager for the city of Coeur d'Alene, but allows us to have department record managers throughout each department. It would be way too hard and onerous for one person to manage every document that the city retains. So each department's been assigned one person in their department that is their designated authority over records retention, and they help put together the information in this manual and the schedules. So that's the Idaho Code that requires us to have one of these things. And then some people wonder, what is a public record? So this definition is outlined in Idaho Code as well. It's been on the books for so long, it only relates to written documents, but the legal interpretation going forward is any of the documents, including audio, visual, digital, all that stuff is now incorporated all into that. So the history of the manual is the city started this in 2006. I think that's when that code came on the books. We've amended it twice since. Some of the amendments you'll see today started out in 2018 when the Idaho Code changed just a little bit to clarify in the manual who actually receives the public records request. So we've added that in for both the city in general, and then the police department was required to list one specifically in there as well. Some of the housekeeping are some of those amendments to some of the definitions for better wording throughout, so it's more clear for those that are using it. We've updated the department custodian list. As you know, people come and go throughout the city, so somebody that was listed on it previously is maybe no longer here. The department's reassigned it to someone else. We have a definition of law enforcement media records. And then we've clarified some of the other records that are outlined in Idaho Code and the number of years that are required to retain those. We're asking to add that the city clerk and the city attorney make reasonable amendments to the schedule. So not the manual, but the attachment that lists out every document in every department and how it's classified under Idaho Code as temporary, permanent, semi-permanent, or historical. So that's something we go through legal with anyway to make sure it meets the intent of the Idaho Code. Some of the amendments also include the departments and how they keep records in their departments. So it used to be they kept them hard copy or in notebooks, and now they keep them digitally. So they've just noted inside the manual that they're now keeping them in a separate location. So all that's been cleaned up. We've updated the destruction process and how to send things to the state of Idaho. The state of Idaho used to have very specific requirements on if you're archiving something through them. So if it's a permanent record, they get the first right of refusal basically to house it for you rather than you having to house it on site. And now they've just made it so much easier, just contact them directly. Used to be like so many dots per inch, certain types of paper, certain types of boxes. We had links in there that are no longer valid. It's no longer valid on their website. So we've cleaned up some of that. And then we replaced the disaster recovery plan. We used to have a joint plan with Post Falls, and we talked about keeping things on each site. Well, that ended about 10 years ago, so it needed to be updated. And now, since most of the stuff is kept electronically, we've kind of deferred to IT management plans. And hope we never have a disaster like flooding or fire. Anyway, the records retention schedule is an exhibit to this manual, and it lists out, as I said, how they're classified pursuant to Idaho Code and how long the department wants to keep those items. It's becoming a little more difficult to keep that up to date because people are constantly creating new types of electronic digital media. Now we're going to be switching to Office 365, and so we're going to have a different methodology of keeping files through Microsoft Teams. So we're going to need to be a little more flexible on how to do that. And just to clarify, the Idaho Code is pretty slim on what it actually states are these types of records. So these are used as sort of examples or intent of what's in these classifications. So like for permanent records, you cannot destroy those. You have to give the opportunity to give them to the state archival system or keep them yourself. They're really specific about meeting minutes, ordinances and resolutions, building plans for commercial and governmental buildings, but that's permanent records. So you can see in here, talks about poll books, other things of that type of nature, but it doesn't refer to anything law enforcement related or in the legal department related. So that's where the departments maybe and the city attorney can kind of go through things and say, this really is something that should be permanently kept. I think some of the things on murders and things like that have to be kept into perpetuity, so the police department's able to designate those accordingly. This section, semi-permanent records, is more of the generic records, and they're kept for about 5 years. Now, the departments can keep them longer. This doesn't mean you have to get rid of them in 5 years, but it can be kept longer. So these talk about some of the financial documents we have, license applications, contracts, things like that. But again, you can see it's a pretty slim list. So it doesn't meet everything in the city. So that's where that interpretation with legal helps. And temporary records are those kind of day-to-day type documents we're only required to keep for 2 years. And again, you can see the list in the code is pretty slim, so we have to do some interpreting when we look at the council or the list from each department. And then they've added a category of historical records. So in the past, we would have just put those as permanent anyway, but now they want to hold them out special and create a special list of historical documents. So I'm not sure here at the city we have a whole gob of historical documents, but we do have these great, amazing old leather-bound books of the city council meeting minutes since its inception in the early 1900s. So I'm sure someday we'll get them over to the archival system, but I've been a little bit hoardish on keeping those ourselves because I worry about the transit of getting those old books down there, but someday I'll let go. And then we've added a definition, previous updates that we've added a little clarity to, called transitory records. So I like to keep thinking of those as in the olden days we'd write those phone messages to each other and you had the carbon copy. So once the message was delivered, it was no longer needed. So these are those type of records where it's quick notes, quick messages. Now we're going to have ability to communicate through Microsoft Teams that are more like phone messages. And those are transitory and they can be destroyed upon the end of their useful life. So like a voicemail message, you don't have to keep those at any lengthy period of time. So those are also noted in some of that records retention schedule. So destruction of records, pretty much it means if we do any destroying of records, semi-permanent or temporary, that has to come before council and you have to approve it under a resolution. So you'll see my next action is asking for some of those, but it is required in our manual to be brought forward to council. So the action we're requesting today is approval of the records retention manual changes and the accompanying retention schedule. And I stand for questions. I have no idea why your lights darkened.
That's all right.
We couldn't see.
Keep us in the dark.
There you go.
Woody, go ahead.
If I could. Difference between permanent and historical. They're the same, but they're separate. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the definition in the code. So they want you to really look at if something has a historical reason. Because the list, if you remember under the Idaho Code, is fairly thin when it talks about what a permanent record is. So you may have something historical that's not an ordinance or a resolution or a contract or agreement. So that gives you that opportunity to lock it down.
Something cool maybe to keep. Okay.
Yeah. I know the fire department, I think, keeps some of the original response cards they had from many, many moons ago that now may be something you want to put in as historical.
Okay. The other question was, so where does email fit in? Is that
So
like
email is a
short-term?
transitory record, or a temporary record.
Okay.
So again, it's not listed in Idaho code, but it's one of those things you have to look at that section and see, is that the intent of that temporary category?
Intent. Mm-hmm. All right. So electronic, when you're saying you're getting rid of stuff, you don't burn things or throw things in the trash anymore, right? Because
Well, yeah, and a lot of times maybe you create it on your computer, say a Word document, and you email it to somebody. You may never even print it. So there's some of that happens too.
So destroying electronic is just delete?
No, it's the same, it's under the same thing. So if it's classified as a temporary record,
Right.
which we've said email is a temporary record, is 2 years.
Okay.
So if it's agreement or contract, that goes under semi-permanent, you'd have to keep it for 5.
Okay.
Yeah,
Quite a production you went
It is,
through here.
it
Oh, my
is.
goodness.
it is.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I get it. This makes sense. You know, I can think of potential like a historical thing. There might be things associated with, from the city, with, say, the movement of the White House and getting that there that weren't necessarily like in the minutes or something, but I mean, definitely historic. And in terms of if you're concerned about your emails, Woody, just remember that actually nothing ever goes away forever. If they really want to retrieve those deleted, so kind of like they say, if you're not comfortable reading it on the front page of the paper, don't put it in an email. But
Well, we did do a records destruction request to delete all emails older than 5 years. We just haven't pulled the trigger yet, but we're headed there, Dan, because it's taken up a lot of space.
Yeah, but then somebody, anyway,
Well,
let's see.
If you're not going to, I wanted to ask a couple.
Sure, yep, yep,
Thanks. Renata, I'm not sure just the average citizen would really grasp how much documentation is done every day in every department of the city, because it's really the whole day you're at work, you're documenting what you're doing. And certainly where I came from at the police department, that's all we did, and legal the same way. Same with our other services as well. So how are we storing all of this, and what's the expense of storing it?
So that's the hard part, right? Because some of it is hard copy. So the expense is taking up all the storage space, putting it in boxes, finding places to store it. So many of the older things are in boxes in a humongous room down here in, I have a nickname for it, but it's not a place I enjoy going. It's full of a lot of dust and probably spiders and stuff. It's not my favorite place. But it makes it so much harder to find things in that old antiquated system, right? And so now each department is kind of figuring it out for themselves. And I think as we move forward with this Office 365, it is going to push us paperless as much as we can. There are certain things that just come to us in hard copy and we can scan in and make them electronic, but there's other things that maybe are always gonna have to be hard copy papers that we're gonna have to find a place to put it. But there will be an expense when we run out of server space and then decide to want to go to the cloud. The cloud is like renting storage space, and it gets very expensive, and you're at the mercy of a third party that can charge you whatever they want every year. So the expense to us is continuing to build that server room and buying more servers, and it's expensive. So the more we kind of maintain it and keep a grasp on it and do these destructions as necessary, then we can keep it a reasonable amount of
Yeah.
storage space online and decide what we're going to do when we hit maximum capacity.
Yeah. Well, and the public absolutely has a right to see what we do. They pay for what we do. But there is a part of being reasonable. What can we store that is, if it's not necessary, why are we actually spending public money to store it?
Right.
So the other thing on your hardbound books, out at the police department, we decided to do a little bit of a historical glass front case for people to come in and look at all the things that we've done throughout the years, a lot of objects and things. But one of them are the old leather-bound old booking books when you took someone to jail.
Yeah.
And those are kind of fun to hold on to, so I hope you are able to hold on to those and maybe even have your own glass display case where people could enjoy them.
Yeah, it's
So-
really hard with those old things, because then every time you touch them, the leather is starting to crack and
Right.
fall apart. And then, we've scanned them in. So we have them digitally now. That was a project a couple years back that we did. So those are available through our library. There's a couple licenses for public consumption for those that want to go dig through them. The handwriting is really squirrely, so sometimes it's hard to see those digitally scanned in copies. But, the pages fade over years. So we felt it was really important to capture them. But yeah, that's my fear, is we don't have the right humidity controlled room, things like that. So there might be a point where we have to
Sure.
get them in the right location, but
Yeah.
they are pretty amazing.
Well, you've done a lot of work here, both you and legal, trying to do these updates, and so I think they're necessary. You were ready to make a motion? Someone was.
Sure, I'll make a motion to recommend that council approve the amendments to the city's retention manual and destruction schedule.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Opposed? Aye? No, I'm in favor. Motion approved. Thank you, Renata.
Thank you.
Item number 4, request approval of a destruction of records for the police, municipal services, legal, and human resources departments pursuant to the city records retention schedule. City Clerk Renata McLeod.
Okay, so this is the second half of that request. So now that we've updated the list, there's some things on the list we want to get rid of, but it had to be on the list first. So that was step 1. So step 2, the police department has some digital storage needs, and they've determined there's some items that come through their Viper system. That is some of the body cam videos that's, video of the back of the wall, inside the car while it's running. It's not associated to a case. So it's time to get rid of those. And those are a temporary 2-year transitory record if they really didn't catch anything. So we're trying to get those off of the servers. Some of the other stuff, they haven't touched in over 5 years. And their videos associated with no active cases, they feel very confident they can get rid of those videos. And it's gonna take a lot of space off the server. I mean, we were hitting a spot in August where we were gonna have to consider buying a whole nother server just for video storage. So this is a really important one for what you were talking about, saving that additional expense for stuff that really is no longer needed. But some of their records are semi-permanent, so they're holding 5 years worth of videos and getting rid of the rest, hopefully. The Municipal Services Department, we found that there's some old records we had prior to going on the GovQA software system where people have handwritten public records requests and things like that. So it's a transitory record. It's only required to be kept for 2 years, but the hard copies go up to 2019, and we're okay with keeping those electronic copies a little bit longer. So we're requesting to destroy those. The legal department, when we had a retirement a few years ago, you might remember Judy House, she had some special projects under her risk management title, and then the legal department helped out with some of the other commissions, and boards that they are no longer involved in. So most of these records are things they're no longer involved in, and records that were temporary in nature and only had to be kept for 2 years. So you'll see, they're saying prior to 2011 because they have no records after 2011 because it was no longer in their purview. So thought that might be a point of confusion, but that's as many records as they have is up to 2011 for those. Some of the other ones, animal control, code enforcement, parking commission, risk management were up to 2016, and because they're no longer involved after 2016. They have some records prior to 2019 that are temporary in record, general documents, discovery requests, and bankruptcy files that are no longer needed. So I think those are all hard copy items they would love to get rid of and make more space in their office. And then the Human Resource Department, same way. When I get one request for destruction of records, I put a call out to all the departments and say, hey, what do you have? Come on, get it to me now. So I think that was one they kind of went through and said, we have a lot of these hanging around. Various employee recruitment stuff, drug testing, things that are no longer needing to be maintained, that are temporary and semi-permanent in nature. Anything that they thought would be imperative to an employee record is scanned in and electronically held with the employee file when they're terminated. Terminate employee, not necessarily fired, but when they leave the employment of the city, that's the term they use. So these are records that are no longer needed or associated with active cases or employees. So again, we're asking for approval of a resolution at council to destroy those records. I stand for questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Get it all out.
Got nothing.
You got, Dan?
Nope.
Questions?
I'll make the motion.
Well, I would just.
Sorry, go.
That's all right. I would just note that we do get an awful lot of public information requests, and anybody watching might be a little bit concerned that, they're going to purge all these records I might want. But what you have done and what legal has done is you have very carefully sorted through these to see what is actually an ongoing situation or necessary to keep. So talking about body cam in a car with a car running and someone left their camera running, that's of no value to anyone, but it's costing a lot of money to maintain it. So I hope people can understand the difference between the records that you're talking about and that legal has gone through, and same with the other departments. I mean, I certainly trust their judgment. They know what to keep. Law enforcement knows what's critical to an ongoing court case, and they'll maintain and keep all of that. So
Absolutely.
It's a
Go
good way
ahead.
to look at it, being the cheapskate that we are, huh?
yeah.
I'd like to move to request the approval of destruction of records for police, municipal services, legal, and human resources department pursuant to the city's record retention schedule.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Motion carries. Thank you, Renata. And our final item is our addendum. Request approval of an agreement with Dimension Health Group LLC to make frontage improvements to North Schreiber Way. City Attorney Randy Adams.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm bringing before you today an agreement to require a property owner to make frontage improvements. The property that we're talking about is located on North Schreiber Way. If you look at the last page of this section of the packet, it shows the building, 3815, and the 3817, 3819, they're all part of the same parcel. You can see right across the street, 3818 is the police department building. This is a commercial area, industrial area, manufacturing area, doesn't get a lot of foot traffic. Dimension Health Group is making some tenant improvements, exterior improvements to their building, preparatory to the Beacon Cancer Center moving in. I also think Ironwood Family Medicine is moving over in that direction as well. Our city code says that when there's alterations or improvements under certain circumstances, you have to bring up, or you have to repair sidewalks, you have to bring approaches up to ADA standards, you have to install ped ramps, all sorts of items. So when this matter came before project review, the Streets and Engineering Department went out, they examined the site, they identified areas of sidewalk that needed to be replaced either because they were damaged or because they had a greater slope than the ADA required. There were two approaches to this area that also needed fixed to meet the ADA requirements. Ped ramps needed to be put in with the truncated domes. And after that project review, the owner said, you know, can we have some time to put this all in? This project's costing us a lot already. Can we do these improvements over time? After some discussion with city administration, the legal department, streets and engineering department, we determined an area of sidewalk that should be replaced immediately, but also said that there were areas, the approaches, the ped ramps, that could be put in later after they've completed all of their tenant improvements, all of the exterior improvements to the building. So we have reached an agreement, subject to council's approval, to allow or to require the property owner to do all of the improvements, to do them within a schedule. All of them will have to be done by October 1st, 2025. Some are going to be done, if they aren't done yet, they will be done by next month. The owner of the building will only get a temporary certificate of occupancy until all of the improvements are completed. Once the improvements are completed and accepted by the city, a permanent CO will be given. If they don't do the improvements or if they balk at that point, we can revoke the temporary certificate of occupancy. We can issue citations. We do have means to enforce this agreement. So we would ask council to approve this agreement. It's reasonable. It fits the situation well, and the streets department is okay with that. Administration is okay with that, and we think the public will be best served by that. I'll stand for questions.
Woody.
I love the soft touch you guys have. It really, you know, that's kind of a part of what this whole city's about. They don't go in swinging
Business
to
friendly.
business
right?
friendly. Well, you know, try and get it done the best you can. This is the old Forest Service building, right?
Yes.
You know, they've been gone a long time. I bet they're
Yeah.
hurting. And they're doing a lot of remodeling there.
There's a lot of internal remodeling and external updates to the building itself.
And it's a beautiful, huge building. It's all like open inside. And
Yeah.
we used to work a lot there. I think it's great that you guys can make them happy, or vice versa.
Both parties are happy.
Yes,
Questions?
that's all I have.
No, I think that sounds like a good compromise.
Very reasonable. All right, with that, I'm looking for a motion.
Sure, I would recommend council approve, oh, no, that's a destruction record, let's see here. Here's my addendum, okay. Recommend to the council approve an agreement with Dimensions Health Group LLC to make frontage improvements on North Schreiber Way.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None?
I move
Motion
to adjourn.
carries.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's
Move to
very
adjourn?
good.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.